Hey, everyone, I'm so excited to be here with you tonight. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name's Pastor Colin, and I'm just so grateful that you're able to be here with us. What we are now doing this month is we're starting a brand new sermon series called Galatians, the Book of Freedom. So you picked one of my favorite nights that you could be here, okay? Because what we're doing is we're exploring this amazing book that whenever people have studied it, they keep putting the same phrasing on it, that this is the Book of Freedom. So it's Freedom Church. I mean, come on, we couldn't resist, all right? But in doing this, we're going to be going chapter by chapter, just exploring the ways that we're able to really live with a lot of freedom in the way that God wants for our lives. So to do this, I have just a little bit of an odd way to kind of get started with tonight's message. How many of you growing up have heard the question from your parents, well, if all your friends were going to do it and that meant that they were going to jump off a bridge, would you do it too? Okay? Have we all had that? All right. Which I know we all would say the same thing. We're like, of course if everybody jumped off a bridge, I wouldn't do it too. But if we all looked at our actions sometimes, it said something very much differently. It often said, willingly, I'd jump off that bridge. Are you kidding me? Because I think about even how I was as a kid. I wanted to fit in with everybody so much. I'm going to sound really old for a second, but I remember when the Game Boy Color came out. This was the greatest invention that ever came into being, okay? And I remember everybody got this, and I remember we were playing it. I remember my, really old Shrek game that I would play on that. It was wild and so much fun. But I remember a few months after that, then Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance, okay? This was, and they did this very slyly because they made it so, you know what, if you got the Game Boy Advance, there's special games, and they don't work on the Game Boy Color. So all my friends got the Game Boy Advance, and they were all talking about, look at this game we got, look at that, and I'm sitting there with my Game Boy Color, like I can't even play the same game. And I was trying, and so what I did when I was about 10 years old, I started saving my money because I'm like, I'm gonna be able to be with everybody else. I'm gonna play the same games. So I saved up my money, and then right as I was about to get the Game Boy Advance, all of a sudden Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance SP. Whew. Finally, because the big difference with this was it had a built-in light, because if you had a Game Boy Color, you hold a flashlight to that thing because you couldn't play it at night. You had to, it was just the worst thing. So I got the Game Boy SP, and I was the coolest guy for 2 months, because after that, of course, Nintendo then released the Game Boy, or the Nintendo DS. And I don't know, listen, this was, man, I feel so old with this, because what was so revolutionary about this was if somebody else had a DS, you could send messages to each other, okay? It was wow, this is so awesome, all right? And I remember everybody else started getting those, and I'm sitting there with my little SP by myself. And everybody else is sending messages back and forth, and I'm like, I just want so badly to be able to fit in with to be able to feel like I'm on the same. And it was that thing that we subconsciously do that we're not aware of. We are trying so hard to be able to fit in with other people, to be able to be there. Can I just ask you, have you ever felt the need before, you had to do a lot to be able to get accepted by somebody else? As if the opinions of other people were just so important, because as we explore, especially chapter 1 in Galatians, this idea of other people's opinions ends up being a reoccurring theme. And not just a theme that exists, it ends up being something that traps, keeps people stuck, and keeps them in a place where they are in no way free simply because they are living for the opinions of other people. And I wish so badly that only happened in Galatians 1, and today we could talk about anything else, because we all don't have issues with opinions, right? I mean, if we're honest, most of us don't really live freely, okay? We live constantly trying to determine, how do other people feel about me? Is this a question you have sometimes? How do other people think about me? Do they like me? Do they think this? Do they think that? I mean, honestly, there's certain times where we only wear certain types of clothes. We only buy certain types of things because we know other people are then going to look at us and be like, they're that kind of person. They're cool. They're awesome. There's certain things that we only post online because we know these people are going to like it. And then there's other things that we're not really being ourselves because we don't want to post things because we're afraid sometimes that if I say this, are people going to think I'm politically aligned with this person or that person? If I bring up this discussion, how do other people feel about me? I mean, can I just be honest? You can actually love God and still be controlled by other people's opinions. Because the loudest voice in life often isn't God. It's the imagined voice of other people. And those voices become internalized, making it difficult to determine what's us, what's somebody else, and especially what's God. And it doesn't help that almost everything around us keeps pointing us to look outside of ourselves, keeps pointing us to look externally and look and say, how do other people perceive you? Because for a lot of us, your value often is your image. And your image often gets associated with just your identity. Things become incredibly confusing. And if I'm just honest, I don't know that we've always been aware of this in church sometimes, of how much other people's opinions affect us. And we've gotten to the point where there's certain things even in church that we won't talk about, certain subjects we can't say because we're afraid of what other people might think. But then even internally, we're saying, I can't share all of myself with the people that I'm supposed to be the most vulnerable with, because if I say the real thing, and I talk about where I'm at in my sexuality, talk about where I'm at in regards to how I'm managing my finances, if I talk about this, how are other people going to perceive me? And I wish so badly this was one of those sermons that I got to tell you, hey, I've worked through this and I don't have any problems with it. I was writing this sermon last night thinking, I hope they like this. Like, oh my God, I mean, man, did I add in enough jokes? Does this make sense? Are they going to think that I'm this kind of person or that kind of, I myself can get in these spots where over and over again, I'm like, I genuinely, I was brought back to a moment back in September when I was the morning I was supposed to be speaking at a church, and before I left, I was having an anxiety attack going, is this outfit cool enough? Okay, can I just be honest with you? That's honestly where I've been at for so long. And this isn't just something that we have to look at and say, this is a small issue. We got to work on this. You know, we don't want to be controlled by other people's opinions. This is almost exactly what caused all of the mess of humanity. Other people's opinions. To bring you back to the very beginning, we understand that God created humanity. And at the very beginning, someone else, another opinion came in to say, are you sure God's opinion is actually the best one? I mean, Genesis 3, 5, and 6, this is literally the enemy, our enemy, speaking to humanity, saying, God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, this tree that God told you not to, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. And then these 4 words are probably the most haunting ones. It says, the woman was convinced. I know, I'm still trying to learn how to convince. Okay, anyway, but it says the woman was convinced. Right there. Let's put it in our context for what we're talking about today. The woman accepted an opinion that wasn't God's. The woman accepted an opinion of someone else. And now today we are still dealing with the mess of all of that, where we don't even know which opinions to trust. We don't know how to be able to fully live in a position of life where we are not ruled by different opinions and still able to accept the opinion of God. We're challenged on how we actually do this. But what I love is the fact that God himself demonstrates that other people's opinions are not the most important thing. Which is why what we love whenever we read about Jesus and understand him is that this is a God who did not care about other people's opinions, which is why he chose to come to this earth in the most humble way imaginable. To the point where everybody looked and said, there's no possible way that could be God. How on earth? Because everybody had an opinion of what God was supposed to be like, how God was supposed to look, how he was supposed to talk, what he was supposed to do on a political level. He comes in saying all of those opinions are not that important. And let me say this main idea for this message is going to sound overly simple, but it is possibly one of the most revolutionary things for our lives. And it's that freedom begins when God speaks, not when anyone else does. Freedom begins when God speaks. A lot of us are waiting for another voice to speak. Freedom for a lot of us would be if our boss was able to say, you are now allowed to have this job, this promotion, this raise. We're waiting for those voices for our freedom. For some of us, it's the voice of saying, yes, I'll go out with you. That would be the voice of freedom, okay? That would be the voice. It would be the voice saying, I'm going to give you all of this money. I'm going to allow you to do this. You're off the hook. You're whatever. All of these other voices are not the ones that are most important. And yet they're the ones that we strive for, the ones that we're hungry for, the ones that are there. And rather than keeping us in a spot where we're free, they actually keep us in a place where we are trapped and stuck and overwhelmed. So this is why we look at Galatians chapter 1. This is why it's so important. And let me just tell you, as we look at this, if you want to even go to it in your Bible, Galatians chapter 1, this is incredibly important because we're learning about a man who also experienced an extreme level of freedom. I mean, this whole book of Galatians is written by a man named Paul. And Paul himself is somebody, when we first read about him in the book of Acts, he shows up on the screen, shows up on this hating Christians, hating the church, hating Jesus, and has this amazing moment where Jesus calls out to him. And then because of that, his whole life turns around and it's changed. I don't think we fully get the context of that. To go from extreme levels of hatred to all of a sudden building the church is not just something that God does on a whim. That's his freedom expressed. So when we're reading the book of Galatians and we're reading about somebody who experienced freedom, this isn't somebody that said, yeah, man, I was terrible at waking up in the morning and God gave me freedom to stop hitting snooze every time. No, this is somebody who experienced amazing amounts of freedom. And in this book, he's really trying to express that and show us what happens. So you'll see in your notes, there's a few verses that I've highlighted that I want to be able to talk through. A few that are really going to point us and show us about opinions and how we work through them. Galatians chapter 1, verse 1 starts off with this verse. It says, "This letter is from Paul, an apostle. I was not appointed by any group of people or any human authority, but by Jesus Christ himself and by God the Father who raised him from the dead." This is a little bit of an odd way to start off a letter, right? Paul, unlike any, and mind you, there's loads of books in the Bible of Paul writing letters to churches. This one, he starts off with the most assertive statement describing himself. There's no other letter that he comes across as this strong about, because he has to talk to other people's opinions about him. So verse 1, we see already he's jumping into this. If we go down to verse 6 and 7, we see some of the opinions of other people and how they're affecting it. It says this, "I am shocked that you are turning away so soon from God, who called you to himself through the loving mercy of Christ. You are following a different way that pretends to be the good news, but it is not the good news at all. You are being fooled by those who deliberately twist the truth concerning Christ." So he's already starting off recognizing people have some opinions about him. People have some opinions about Jesus, and he already has to be talking to those opinions. And he continues in verse 10, just showing more of his principles for life. And he says this, "Obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servant." Now, let me just tell you for a second, before we get into the last couple verses of this passage I want to tell you about. The specific group Paul's writing to was in this whole area of Galatia. All these different types of Christians that were probably in different types of churches, but he's writing to this entire area, and he's talking to these people that are dealing with a lot of political unrest. Tensions are high because of what Rome is doing right now to this area, and everybody's now looking, saying, how does Jesus fit into political tension? Does this book now seem more relevant to us? Like, does this sound like, all right, Paul, what'd you say? All right, how do we deal with this? Because right now, the tensions on a lot of things in life can feel overwhelming. And what he does here at the end is he has to talk about a few other things. So we're going to look at verses 17 through 19 just to tell you this. It says this, "Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to consult with those who were apostles before I was. Instead, I went into Arabia, and later I returned to the city of Damascus. Then 3 years later, I went to Jerusalem to get to know Peter, and I stayed with him for 15 days. The only other apostle I met at that time was James, the Lord's brother." Why does Paul mention these couple things? Because everybody's basically looking at Paul at this point. This was the opinion of him in Galatia. Paul, we don't really think you're much of a Christian. We kind of think you're a fanboy, that now you just like the idea of Christianity because you hung out with some of these guys. So at the very beginning, Paul is starting off talking to a whole church saying, let me just talk and confront some of the opinions that you have about me, because how I live my life is not being bound by the opinions of others. So I want to just look at some of these verses that we just walked through for a second. And my goal with this, hear me, there's some sermons that we listen and we're just trying to intellectually absorb. As we go through this, I'm going to ask you to do something different. I want you to be present, not just with what I'm saying, with what Jesus is saying to you right now. Because what I believe is this, is that whenever we're doing a speech and we're just talking about something, of course, we should just be listening and receptive. But what makes a sermon different than a speech is that something happens beyond us, beyond myself, whenever we start talking and looking and absorbing and reflecting on the Word of God. Someone else speaks outside of myself, and I really hope, because my words are not that impressive, but the goal is that as we sit and we reflect and we listen, that we might be able to hear something more. So as we walk into some of these steps of how do we break out of a lot of the opinions people have over us, I want you to just start thinking for yourself, okay, what are the opinions that I do have? What is God revealing to me and showing me? Are some of the spots where I'm holding on to specific opinions, and they might be specific people that you have in your life right now. There might be some specific ones that are coming to your mind, whether that's some of the people that were there in your formative years, whether that's a parent, whether that's an older sibling, or it might be that there's somebody like your boss, somebody that's important to you, and their opinion of you matters so, so much. How do we break that? How do we live in freedom? How do we live in a place where that stuff doesn't bind us and keep us down? I want to look at some of these verses again. Galatians 1:1, okay? Just to read this again. It says, "This letter is from Paul, an apostle. I was not appointed by any group or people or any human authority, but by Jesus Christ himself and by God the Father who raised Jesus from the dead." Again, Paul, and there is not another letter that he gets this intense, this clear, this much from the beginning, saying, hey, I want you to understand this, because Paul had some truth that he was living, and the truth was this, is that he had confidence that Jesus called him. And we need to have confidence that Jesus called you. This is already a different place that he's starting from. He's not saying, do you remember when you guys liked me and you accepted me? Do you remember whenever I was there and we were vibing so well? Do you remember that? No, he doesn't start off with anything about them. He starts off with the fact that Jesus called him. And I need you to understand this. I realize I could look at Paul so easily and be like, well, yeah, Paul, I'd probably have a lot of confidence too. If the sky opened up and a bright light shone down and all of a sudden I heard the voice of God, I'd probably have a lot of confidence in that. When Paul talks, he doesn't talk about how he heard Jesus. He talks about who called him. I want you to hear this for yourself right now. It doesn't matter how Jesus calls you. It's the fact of who called you. Because the experiences we all have can be something that can be a little bit off, shaky, something that really changes person to person. But the person who calls you in Jesus is one of strength and one of love. Paul doesn't start off this letter by saying, do you remember that really amazing moment? He starts off saying, no, but by Jesus Christ himself. His rationale, his understanding of this has nothing to do with the fact that he had an amazing moment. It has to do with the fact that there was an amazing person that called him. Just take that in for a second, okay? I don't want you to just rush past this. There is an amazing God who has called you, an amazing God who has spoke to you. Jesus himself calling you into something more, not just to do something, but to be with him in relationship. Because it wasn't like God just spoke and said, Paul, you're going to go do amazing things. It was calling him back to himself. Each and every one of us, whether this is the moment where we have the realization of the call, or we understand that at some point in life, Jesus has called and continues to call me, ends up being the place that I stand and build my life on. That Jesus himself called me to do this, to be in a relationship with him. Look again at some of the wording in this, because he's choosing some really specific word choices. He's saying, I wasn't appointed by any group, any human authority. And he's not saying here in this moment that we shouldn't have leadership, that we shouldn't have an accountability, that we should just disassemble all the systems. Obviously not, because Paul's writing a letter out of a heart of accountability. So clearly he's not against it. What he is against is that being the foundation of everything, of the opinions of whether or not we should continue following Jesus, be obedient in following him and taking the steps that we need to take. If it all rests on other people's opinions, we're not going to move forward. And if we think we're moving forward, we're moving in another direction. We're moving towards something that's not actually Jesus. We're moving towards something that is actually off. If I can just be honest again, I spent years of my life looking for validity like this, of somebody that could just look and be able to really be the ones who affirm those words, that thing that Jesus has called each and every one of us. I remember whenever I graduated college, I thought to myself, like, man, I still haven't had this sense, this belief yet in the fact that Jesus called me. So I started doing, exactly what 4-year-olds doing, where I started having a temper tantrum, but I did it in adult behavior. So let me phrase that differently. I decided, let me get a master's degree, because then people will look at me and validate me. And I remember telling people about it. Guess what? Nobody cared. And I was so upset. I was like, but I'm important. Look. I remembered at that point, I started playing bass a lot, and I remember I got booked to play bass with a band at one of the biggest venues in all of Pittsburgh. Guess who showed up to that show that I knew? Not a single person. And I was so upset because I was like, man, like this is I thought people would be proud. I thought people would be accepting. I thought, and especially if you're like me and you got a personality profile that's similar to an Enneagram 3, where all you want to do in life is you want to achieve, you want to show, you want to be valuable, you want to be able to prove to everybody that you are, and all of a sudden nobody else around you is validating it. All of a sudden those opinions of other people aren't just something that you're curious about, you're striving for. You're saying, well, maybe I should start making these types of posts to get everybody's attention. Maybe I should start dressing this type. Maybe I should start talking. Maybe I should switch up my job to do this type of a thing in order to attract the type of affirmation, the type of validation that really, healthily, only comes from Jesus. And let me look at it from other people. There was so much wasted time. I look back, and I'm thankful for the way God redeemed it. But I also look and I say, the years that I spent wanting validation from anybody other than God brought me to a place where I was just trapped. Brought me to a place where I couldn't even accept myself. Can I remind you for a second that he called you? Not just to do something, but to be in a relationship with him. And above all other opinions that are coming at this guy, and mind you, I think we can all just imagine if you had a group of people that were questioning your validity, questioning your authority, you might want to start off with, here's all the evidence. Paul only says one thing. I was called by Jesus Christ. I was called by him. And because he spoke to me, he called me, that's more than enough. That's stronger than anything you or anybody else will be able to say, that he called me. That already is the foundation and the place where freedom starts, because that's where God speaks first beyond anybody else. He continues on in here, and I want to focus on verse 10, because when I first read this verse, I was like, Paul, why did you add this in here? Verse 10 says this, obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servants. Now, this is one of those verses we could kind of take out of context, and we could read as the people that are going, if you don't like me, you don't like me. I'm just going to speak the truth. I'm just going to say whatever I want. And if you don't like it, I'm not trying to please you anyway. Okay? Have you met these people where they're just like, they don't care how they say it. They don't care how it comes across. Listen, let me just be clear on this. My goal and our goal is not that we're supposed to please people. Actually, Jesus puts it like this. I'm supposed to serve people, okay? Because what we learned here is that I have to choose to please God instead of others. Okay, we have to start off saying like, all right, I recognize my call and I live in the confidence of that, but then there's a choice. Then there's a moment where I have to choose which voices are the most important. Which voices are the ones that I hold on to? Which voices are the ones, when it comes down to it, are the ones that I'm actually going to hold on to? And can I just be very honest? When it comes down to us as human beings, our approval changes all the time. Let me just take a poll for a second. How many of you here in this room hate running? Okay? Oh, come on. I know. Yeah, all right? Give it 3 years. You're going to love it, okay? Because anybody who didn't raise their hand, they're like, oh, I love running. Running's my favorite thing. Running's great. And nobody started off like that. Nobody said, I just want to run. We all avoided it. We all said, this is the worst thing. And then we get to a spot where we're like, this is amazing. These are and we start grabbing other people into it. And we're like, you know what? Let's all do this together. Let's all run. Because our opinions and our approval as human beings change all the time. Can I just remind you, all of a sudden, we all like drinking this green grass drink called matcha. Like, is nobody concerned about what that is? Like, nobody looked at that and went, that looks delicious, okay? That looks like somebody put grass in a blender, all right? But we as human beings have all of a sudden said, yeah, but we all approve of it. We all like it because our approval changes so quickly. I mean, if we're really trying to get the approval of other people, can I just set the reality for you? You are trying to get the approval of something that is so temporary. It changes over and over again. In order for us to continue getting the validation, the approval of people, we ourselves will lose ourselves over and over and over again, trying to fit into whatever we decide now is the thing. And even ourselves, if we're trying to just go for our own approval, we won't get there. It's as if we are trying to have a master in our lives that just doesn't even want us. And this is what Paul's even trying to get us to understand, get this church especially to understand, is you only get to pick one master really in your life. You can't have two. And whenever we're talking about pleasing, let me just kind of put this into some different context here, because especially when it comes to our heart, it can feel really easy, like, well, I just got to do my church things, or I got to do, like, let's put this in a different context. Your heart, you can't put in two places at once. When it comes down to what your passions, what your desires, what opinions you like, really, you can't give it to two people. You can only give it to one. So when it comes down to our heart, are we saying, God, your opinions are really the most important ones? Or are we saying, I want all of these other opinions over here, and I don't even know who they are, I don't even know what it's difficult. And let me just kind of speak some of the parts that feel realistic on this. On one sense, it can feel really like, yeah, Colin, you're saying it's temporary to gain the approval of people. But on the other side of this, how on earth do I gain the approval of God? Because if I just had to sit down with each one of you, and I would love to do that, by the way, but if we had to sit down, I could guarantee the majority of us would say in some type of a way, I feel like God's disappointed in me. I can't tell you how many people I've sat with that have had this same sense of saying, I'm not doing enough with my life. I'm not reading my Bible enough. I'm not praying enough. And they'll give me all of these things as far as saying, we're not doing enough. We're not. And Paul himself is really not trying to tell us you need to please and do all of these different things. Verses 6 and 7, again, when he's talking, saying, I'm shocked that you're turning away. What was happening there? All these people are starting to accept that, man, what Jesus did, it was okay, but we have to add on all these other laws. We have to add on all these other things in order to really please God, in order to get his attention. When we're talking about pleasing, as far as what would be the most pleasing thing to God, it's not your actions, it's your presence. When it comes down to what God wants, it's not him saying, I want you to be perfect, and I want you to do all these things. No, let Jesus be Jesus and you be you for a second, okay? Because what he really wants is not you to do all these things. He wants you to be near him. He wants you to be in a relationship with him. That's why he called you in the first place. He didn't call you saying, I need you to do this giant checklist. He said, I need you to be with me in my presence. When it comes down to our heart, we're not just putting this saying, well, I accept these opinions and I really care about what these people think. What we're really saying is I'm putting my heart in the presence of other people, saying, if you don't accept me, I don't know how I ever will. But when we put our heart and we give it to God, saying, I need you to be the one that speaks to me first, before I even open my phone to see what emails I got, how many likes I got, or how many of this, I need to be able to wake up and to be able to say, God, you called me, you loved me. There's not anything you're requiring of me except that I just look at you with my life, except that I return it back to you, being able to say, I'm going to just be with you. Whatever you have to say about me, whatever words you want to speak to me, those are the ones that I'm going to hold so dearly, instead of comparing, saying, God, how could I ever expect you to love me so unconditionally when they didn't? If you're in a place like that, it becomes very obvious, a little bit more black and white for us to be able to see whose opinions are you choosing? Whose approval, whose pleasing are you trying to win? And let me just put it really simply for you. You don't have to win God's approval. Jesus already did that for you. You just have to be in it and be able to be present with him. And for the majority of us, myself included, we live so much based on the opinions of how other people feel. So again, freedom starts when God speaks, not when anybody else does. So we accept the fact that he called us. We accept the fact that, man, even despite me and my sinfulness, me and my problems, Jesus still looked at each and every one of you saying, I want them. And then we choose him back. And then what Paul is really referencing here later in this chapter, in verses 17 through 19, everybody again is poking at him, saying, hey, we realize you hung out with some of the elites. These are some of the great guys. You hung out with Peter. You hung out with James. Really, what was the point of this? Paul's answering back on this. He says, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to consult with those who were apostles before I was. Instead, I went to Arabia, and later I returned to the city of Damascus. Then 3 years later, I went to Jerusalem to get to know Peter, and I stayed with him for 15 days. The only other apostle I met there at that time was James, the Lord's brother. What's he trying to communicate by saying any of this stuff? Why even say it other than to just kind of dismantle some of the argument? He's telling us, hey, I went there, because this is the third point of this sermon, to learn from those who have overcome. Whenever we talk about people in the Bible who cared about people's opinions, I would want to talk to Peter. Whenever we learn about Peter, we learned the night that Jesus was betrayed and taken away, there were some people that came to Peter, and Peter folded immediately at what other people's opinions were. Whenever they asked him, hey, do you know Jesus? He was like, nope, I don't know him. And then they asked him a second time, no, I don't know him. Third time, I absolutely don't know him. I can imagine if I were Paul, I'd want to talk to this guy and go, how did you make it through whenever you wanted to keep going back to other people's opinions? What is it that you did? I mean, this other guy, James, when we're talking about people's opinions, listen, if you got issues with a sibling, James probably had a bigger issue. Imagine being Jesus' brother. Imagine being compared to him. Imagine your mom saying, why can't you be more like Jesus? Okay? Why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you heal yourself? There's so many things that I would grow up with such a complex if I were James going, oh my goodness, the opinions, like this is crazy. And yet somehow James, actually, we read in his book, he gives a similar message talking about picking and choosing your master. And then I see also something here in verse 10 of Paul saying something again about who you're choosing to have as your master. I wonder if Paul learned something from James. I wonder if it's almost for each and every one of us this practical step we have to take of saying, I need somebody else in my life to help me overcome, to remind me what voice I need to hear, to remind me and help me understand that voice that has been speaking to you for so long, that's not God. And his voice is actually one that gives you more freedom to be able to move forward. That's actually something we're trying to do here a lot as a church. Whenever we're talking about, hey, come to Bible study, it's not because we're just trying to grow intellectually. When we're talking and we're sitting and we're going, hey, how do you hear God? Here's how I hear God. What we're doing is we're trying to be able to expose and share ourselves to be able to say, I've got it wrong in this category. I've done it wrong in this type of a way. I've had mistakes that I've learned in this. We're learning together how we overcome. We talked last week about how we're starting to do some spiritual mentoring here. That's especially whenever we're sitting down to be able to hear from somebody else. What is it that you've learned? What is it? Because, again, Paul sat down with Peter, sat down with James, got some of the encouragement so that whenever there's an entire church of people, look, let's be honest, you and I can't deal with it when there's one person that doesn't like us. This guy's got a whole community that's now questioning whether or not he's even legit. And those opinions aren't making him mad. They're not making him overwhelmed. They're not making him feel like, I missed it. I'm off. I shouldn't be doing this. He's able to respond back with some confidence. He's able to respond back to be able to say, I know who I am. I know whose I am. I know who I'm choosing because I've had other people that have spoken into my life. That might be a step you need to take. Even at the end, when we close out this time together of worship and our service is finished, there's going to be people that are in this room just waiting to pray with you. Those are sometimes people you need to go to and you need to talk to. Tonight might be the night where, listen, this week you can't afford to have 7 more days where you are brought down by the opinions of other people. You need somebody else that's going to be able to stand with you, to be able to say to you, listen, together, we're going to be able to point and look towards Jesus to be able to see that there's some way, another way, a better way to be able to live life and not being brought down by the opinions of other people. It's important that we do this and we realize we can't do this by ourselves. We have to do it with other people because what I see all throughout the Bible, this pattern that exists is that God's opinions overshadow anybody else's. God's opinions are more important. God's voice and what God wants to say to you is so much more valuable, holds so much more weight, holds so much more truth, has so much more evidence to it than what any other person. And I realize there's people that you might say, but they've known me my whole life. Yeah, but God's the one who created you before you were even born. I think I can trust his voice just a little bit more. Because even as I was praying for you today, these words just kept coming into my mind for you. God speaking it to you, him saying, my important is more important than theirs. If there's nothing else, you're able to walk out of this with some level of a semblance of confidence to be able to know that when God speaks to you, he's saying, my opinion of you holds so much more weight than theirs. So why are you listening to them? Because all throughout the Bible, I see a God who shows up. And whenever other people's opinions seem like the one that's really carrying the way, the ones that are going to make it forward, his opinions are the ones that really make it. I think through the story of David. I think through this moment whenever he was just a young shepherd boy out in the field, and when a prophet came up, showed up to their house saying, there is the future king here. The father said, I don't need to bring up David. He's out in the field. It couldn't possibly be him. And this prophet again and again heard God being able to tell him, listen to my opinions on this. Don't judge with your eyes. Don't judge with anything else. Listen until, again, God's opinion was the one that overshadowed so many cultural barriers that David's anointed. We see this over and over again whenever everybody expected Jesus to show up as a king and all of these glory and a castle and all of these things. God said, I want that 14-year-old girl right there. I realize the opinions that are going to be said about her. I realize the opinions that she might have about herself right now, but I'm choosing her right now. This 14-year-old that was able to have faith, more faith than even some other people. What I see over and over again, and what I'm hoping that I hear, are the stories of you, of when everybody else in your life spoke against you. You had people for years speak down to you. Yourself also might be one of the loudest voices saying, it couldn't be me. I couldn't be that person because of the opinions that we have there. What if your story changed and you were able to say, yeah, but I broke out of that. I stepped out of that. I stepped into the fullness of who God actually called me to be in the opinion that he has for me. And can I tell you, it is the most freeing thing when you just get to be you. It is the least exhausting thing when you don't have to try, you don't have to perform, you just get to be you. And it feels even more free whenever you're in that place with Jesus. Because let me remind you, he called you. Let me remind you, you get to choose. It's not just about what other people say. And let me remind you, there are people that are ready and willing to walk with you. People that are wanting to, that are fighting, that have prayed over the very seats that you are sitting in right now, that have been hoping and praying and believing that of the opinion that you choose, it not just be what the world says about you, what your family said about you, what that boss who didn't care about you said about you, but really what Jesus has to say about you. I want to just take a moment to pray with you right now. I want to just take a moment to be able to respond, to be able to think about what Jesus might be saying to you, because I hope even in this that you're not just hearing my voice, that you're not just hearing things that I'm saying, but you're starting to hear the fact that there is a real God who loves you, a real God who's been so intentional in your life, and he's calling you right now. He's speaking to you right now, reminding you his opinions are so much more important. Can I just ask, with everyone's eyes closed for a second, just with you focused on Jesus, whether or not you've been following him for a while, this might be the day you need to make a decision. If you've got some opinions and you're saying, I need to be free of this. I need to drop this. I need to release this because it's time. It's time I walk in freedom. It's time I step out and I finally live the life God made for me. If you need to say, I need to step into freedom, could you just lift your hand up just so that I could see you and know that I need to pray with you right now? This is a sign even of you saying, Jesus, I'm choosing your opinion right now. I just want to pray with you. God, I declare over every single one of us in here that our ears would become more attuned to you, not just ourselves. That we would start to be able to hear more of you. That your opinions would be the ones that we fight for. Not just ones that we say, I hope that's just an encouraging one, but we say we are going to stand on this despite what anybody else says. Despite how anybody else looks at us, treats us. We know you called us, so we choose your opinion right now. That our God who loved us so much came to this earth to die for us so that we might not have to live under the pressure, the weight, the authority of other people's opinions, but instead we get to live under what you say. Live under how you say it, what you say for us. God, today collectively in this place, we choose your opinion.